it finally happened. After owning a Childe for almost 1 year, I decided to raise him from 0 to hero, starting at level 1. In my Lenny's 0 to hero video, I asked you guys to comment if you wanted to see Childe finally getting released from jail. Make sure to comment "Release Childe from jail" down in the comments below, and I only do Childe's video if I see 100 or more comments saying it, so get busy. And a lot of you really thought he was innocent, so now he'll finally get his time to shine. For those of you wondering why it even took me that long to even raise my Childe, it's because initially I didn't really like Childe's playstyle. Okay, before you get your pitchforks out, after maining Childe for 20 days, I have a newfound appreciation and respect with Childe's playstyle. So over the course of 20 days, I played Childe in different team comps and just tried out his best teams and compared the damage between them. Even though Childe is a pretty old character that was released all the way back in Genshin's version 1.1, he is still one of the best DPS characters in the game, which we'll find out why in this video. Without further ado, here's how I raised Childe from 0 to hero in 20 days. I spent the very first day running around and getting used to playing Childe. I started out testing him in an Electro Charge team. Childe's Hydro application is actually really good with his elemental skill, where he just changes into melee stance. Even though I was only at level 1, I was able to quickly deal with the enemies in front of me. One thing I had to watch out for was Childe's elemental skill cooldown, since the longer we stay in melee stance, the longer the cooldown will be. So with Childe's whole playstyle, we just had to play with precision, and hopefully don't mess up with any rotations. Keep in mind that even though I was only at level 1 at the time, I did have fully leveled up artifacts, which is why I was able to deal good damage. Anyways, throughout these next 20 days, I have some self-imposed goals that I'm hoping to accomplish. For my first goal, I like to level up Childe to 90 by the end of the 20 days. So far in my previous challenges, I was always able to complete this goal, so this also should be easy. My second goal is to hit 100k damage with Childe in one hit. Since Childe has a pretty hard hitting burst, this should be doable after I raise him up. My third goal is to complete the Spiral Abyss. Childe is pretty flexible with his team comp, and since he's a Hydro character, he'll be able to fit into a lot of different teams. So I'll also try a different team for each floor of the Abyss and see how it goes. With Childe considered as the best DPS in the game, I'll also be aiming for 36 stars in the Abyss. My fourth goal is one unique to Childe. Once I successfully completed all of the goals above, I'll go and have a decisive battle with myself, to prove that the only one that could beat me is me. Lastly, my final goal is to just learn something I didn't know about Childe before I began this 20-day journey. And at the end of the video, we'll come back and review my goals to see if we successfully achieved any. To continue on the first day, I raised my Childe up to level 19 and went around fighting some more enemies. This eventually took us passively to level 20 after fighting a few more enemies, and I was able to ascend Childe for the first time, and I leveled him up to 39, so I just ended my first day here. I started my second day leveling up the Rust weapon for Childe. I went around farming for the essential materials while testing out a different Electro Charge team. This team was decent. Even though Childe was the only Hydro character on the team, his melee stance was able to provide enough Hydro application to the enemies. I also fought some Voltyea agents as well, and they were all pretty easy, especially with his team comp. I also got to level 40 as well in the meantime, so I was able to ascend Childe again. After that, I leveled up a bit of my talents and ended my day here. On day 3, I actually decided to do something different with my team. I tested out Childe with a Nilo Super Bloom team. With Childe and Nilo, our Hydro applications were more than enough for the blooms, so we were able to consistently bloom and defeat the enemies pretty quickly. I ascended my Childe again and leveled him up to 59. I brought the same team to fight Ocean Man, to just test out how well it fares against Hydro enemies. Since Childe is mostly a Hydro DPS, we couldn't really do anything to the enemies directly, but Denzo was strong enough to delete all of the Hydro mimics in one hit. In the majority of his fight, Childe just acts as a cheerleader, but luckily we were still able to defeat a boss here, and we were also able to wrap up our third day. On day 4, I decided to try out a Hyper Bloom team. Even though my Childe wasn't at max level yet, he was mostly in a team to apply Hydro and enable the Hyper Bloom reaction, which he surprisingly does a pretty good job at. This team comp also has its flaws, however, because Childe was the only Hydro in the team, so when my skills were on cooldown, I was forced to charge attack to apply Hydro. Luckily, the enemy's hero was still pretty easy, so even without a fully leveled up Childe, we were slicing through the mecha enemies like butter. This Hyper Bloom team will definitely be better with an extra Hydro character in the team though, so my Childe will have more support applying Hydro. Next, I also tried an integrational team that consists of Childe, Nahida, Kazuha, and Bennett. This team is supposed to be one of the best for Childe, but since I'm only level 59, I couldn't use it to its full potential. Plus, I'm still pretty bad with Childe's rotation in general. So on day 5, I ascended Childe and finally got him to level 69. I also leveled up his weapon to level 70 as well, so hopefully we'll be able to deal more damage. I was also able to practice a bit more on Childe's rotation with the integrational team, but the enemies in Fontaine died a bit too fast before I could do anything. Some enemies were also pretty bad for Childe since they were immune to Hydro, so I couldn't really showcase his full potential in this team, Although I had to pick on some COs in the meantime to see my Childe's damage so far, I was able to play around with his team for a bit in Voltyea. And so far the teams I've used were all pretty strong. Hopefully once we get to fight the tougher enemies, we'll be able to properly showcase Childe to his full potential. Anyways, on the 6th day, I went back to the Taser team comp and just went around the overworld collecting materials. With a Taser team, it's actually pretty good against the enemies in the overworld. And with Childe's attack animations, it was also pretty satisfying as well. I know the Taser team isn't Childe's best team comp, but I had a lot of fun with it, especially since I'm just running around farming for materials and don't have to worry about min-maxing damage. After running around Tava for a good amount of time and testing out this team comp, I'll definitely try out this team as well in the Abyss to see how well it fares against stronger opponents. Before the week ends, I returned to Voltyea to finish up some farming. I was able to clear out a good amount of enemies and gather a bunch of different materials as well. Next, I went to challenge the King Crab in Voltyea and chose to use the Burgeon team with Thoma. This team was actually pretty good, and it was really effective against the crab boss, so we were able to cook it alive. I continued on through Voltyea with the same team to test it out against weaker enemies, and Childe's Burgeon team definitely piqued my interest as well. At the end of the day, I was able to ascend Childe to level 80, and I also got his Rust bow to level 80 as well. With the first week now over, my initial impression with Childe definitely changed a lot. With a bigger character roster now in Genshin, I was able to try out all kinds of team with Childe. On day 8, I went with a Hyper Bloom team comp again, but this time I have Xingqiu to help out with Hydro applications. This proved to be pretty effective since we don't have to worry about the lack of Hydro on our team anymore while Childe's skill were on cooldown. Hyper Bloom in general is one of my favorite reactions, so seeing it work well with Childe is definitely refreshing. I was able to use this team to farm a lot of Voltyea agents, and Hyper Bloom was able to kill them while they were invisible. After a bit of farming, Childe finally leveled up to 80 as well, so that was also nice. I ended my day just leveling up Childe's talents and got them all to level 8. I started day 9 ascending the Rust to level 90, using the Voltyea agent's materials, and was able to max the weapon as well. I also bought a battle pass and got a new bow as well, so we'll also be able to level up the weapon so we can try it on Childe to see how it is. Anyways, I went to Voltyea for some weekly bounties. I brought Childe's international team, which consists of Xiangling, Kazuha, and Bennett to fight the bounty enemies. The first boss was immune to Hydro, so it made showcasing Childe a bit more difficult. Luckily, we were still able to defeat it in the end. The next enemy was a Hydro Eidolon, who was already immune to Hydro. Thankfully, we could vaporize it pretty easily since it was already wet, so the fight was easy. The purple ball was the first enemy we could actually test out the international team with, and I was able to deal around 71k damage with my burst. So hopefully we'll be able to complete our 100k damage goal soon. This team is arguably the best Childe teams, but since we were in the overworld, all the enemies pretty much died too fast for us to properly test the damage. On day 10, I started to farm Oceanid in order to ascend Childe. I brought a Taser team with me so I can electrocharge the enemies, and it was definitely effective. As always, the boss dropped 2 materials, but hopefully our luck will change soon. I continue to farm materials for my new bow, and tried out a Freeze team with Childe. I know Freeze isn't really the best for him, but my team synergizes well with each other. Damage-wise, it's definitely not the best, and with Childe as the main DPS of the team, the fights took longer than usual in the overworld. The good thing about Freeze teams is that we can actually fight the fungi enemies and get their normal drops, so I guess that was a win. Anyways, I was able to farm a good amount of drops from the Hydra looking enemies as well, and ended my day here. I continue on day 11 fighting the Oceanid boss again. This time I brought along a Hyper Bloom team with me to one-shot the enemies. This team is particularly good against Oceanid's Hydro Mimics, and Kirara was able to shield us from their attacks. After getting through the bosses, we were rewarded with another 2 drops. Okay, before you forget, make sure to like the video so you may get better luck like me. Anyways, I went to farm for some enemies in Sumeru. I also used the international team again to train for my eventual Spiral Abyss challenge. Here, I also learned the unfortunate side of being a Childe main. Yes, he never crits with his bursts. Since I still haven't hit 100k damage yet, I'm hoping that in the next 9 days, I can actually complete my initial goals that I set up for this 0 to hero challenge. Luckily, I was able to inch closer and closer and actually did 82k damage next. And just a few Ruin Drakes later, this happened. So with us completing our first goal, we have a few more left that I'm pretty sure we'll be able to complete before the end of the challenge, but that's a sign of relief. On day 12, I went with a Freeze team again to hunt for some fungi enemies. I also tried out the new weapon on Childe, but so far I can't really tell the difference. With Freeze, the damage wasn't really anything special, but this team is practically invincible with the enemies being frozen and Layla's shields protecting us from the enemies. On the bright side, I was able to farm up a bunch of fungi materials, since Hydro and Cryo don't activate the fungi enemies. Before I ended my day, I swapped to some physical artifacts and went to fight Oceanid with a physical Childe build. This way, my Childe actually dealt damage against the mimics. I was actually doing pretty well, hitting around 4k to 6k with his normal attacks. It eventually took down the Oceanid. We actually got rewarded with 3 boss drops as well, and I ended my day here. On day 13, I started off fighting Oceanid again with my Taser Childe team. We made quick work of him, and then were able to obtain the last boss drops, to finally ascend Childe to max ascension. I also leveled him up to 89, and did the same for the new Battle Pass bow. Afterwards, I used another Burngen team, and tried it out against enemies in the ley line. Against a small wave of enemies, this team instantly deletes everyone we see. Burngen in general is a pretty fun team to play, and with Childe, he definitely made the team even better. With Burngen, I could also vaporize with Childe as well to do a lot of damage, since the enemies are affected by pyro, so that's definitely a bonus. Dental Travel was not needed, however, since I already had Nahida, so another Hydro character would most likely be better overall. With 2 weeks now under our belt, I went to complete some Fontaine bounties again. Now that my Childe is maxed at level 90, I went with the Bloom team again to see how it goes. The first boss was immune to the Hydro attacks, but Bloom was able to finish it off pretty quickly. Childe's quick Hydro application definitely helped out a lot in this team. One thing that we probably need is a healer like Baizu or Yao Yao, since we took a lot of damage from Ninos' Bloom. But this team is also very strong. Fun-wise, this Childe team is definitely on the top, and it also deals a lot of damage, so that's a win. Even though my Nahida is C2, I feel like even without the constellations, this team can still work very well. I spent the rest of the day just playing around this team, and enemies couldn't even last 1 rotation before they all died. I also tried it against a stronger boss, but the crab also did not last very long. On day 15, I tried out Childe's Taser team again in Voltyea. Now that he's level 90, he made quick work of the enemies here. This was also the same exact team as the one in the trial for Childe, so they all work really well with each other. Even though the Taser team isn't as strong as the Bloom teams, it was still definitely fun, which is more important. This team also doesn't really rely on precise rotations, so it also worked out well for me as someone that is still learning Childe. I also went to challenge the Abyss as well to work towards finishing our next goal. I used the Taser team since floor 9 was pretty easy. Since the Abyss has more enemies, I was able to actually showcase this team better, and we got through the first chamber pretty quickly. On chamber 2, there were a bunch of crabs, but they were not really threatening to us. Childe was able to defeat the pyro slimes in here as well, and we just breezed by the second chamber without much trouble. The third chamber also has some mecha and Fatui enemies, and we just made quick work of them. Floor 9 in general was perfect for Taser, so it's nice to show off this team with Childe. I started off day 16 hunting some specters in Inazuma. I tried to practice with a Childe international team again, but as expected, the enemies here are too weak for a showcase. I still had a lot of fun with this team as well, even though I couldn't properly test the team out. I got a good amount of farming done as well, so it's pretty much a win-win situation for me. This team is definitely one of the best for Childe, so I'll most likely use it in Abyss as well. So I returned to the Spiral Abyss and went with a Hyper Bloom team first, for floor 10. I brought Shincho with me as well to help out with Hydro applications, and it definitely didn't disappoint. Since it's the Abyss, the enemies are a little bit tougher than the ones in the Overworld, so we got to experience the true strength of Childe's Hyper Bloom team, even though we're still able to complete the whole chamber in 1 rotation. The final chamber was pretty easy as well, and we just picked the enemies off one by one to complete floor 10. On day 17, I went around the desert and just hunted some Dorito enemies. I tested out a Burngen Vaporized team. This team isn't really the best for Childe, and I ran into a lot of problems with energy. But something about just comboing off of Childe's burst with Burngen was pretty satisfying. The Dorito enemies in the desert were pretty tanky as well, so I was actually able to slash them a few times before they died. I also got a good amount of drops, and got my monthly Dorito farming done. Although this team kinda works against enemies in the Overworld, we will probably run into a lot of trouble with rotation and burst uptime in the Abyss, so I will probably use the Burngen team instead. Afterwards, I just stopped and ended the day. With the final day approaching us, I started day 18 with more Abyss runs. I went to floor 11 with a Burngen team, but I brought 2 pyro characters with me because the first chamber is a pain to deal with, especially with all the cryo slimes. We also had to defend the monoliths, so we had to speedrun this chamber fast. Luckily, the Burngen team worked wonders here, and even with Childe as the only Hydro character on the team, we got through the first chamber with all 3 stars. The second chamber was pretty easy. There were some new Fontaine enemies here, but Burngen was able to instantly delete all of them. The Bishop enemies were also pretty easy as well, so we didn't really struggle. Lastly, 2 Frosty enemies were a standing target for Childe, and they were also dropped pretty fast without putting up the fight. In the final chamber, we had to fight the Primordial Bishop. The boss had a good amount of HP, so it didn't die instantly. But with Burngen applying pyro to the boss, Childe was able to vaporize 130k damage as well with his burst. It was just pretty nice to fight a boss that was thick, and in the end, we were able to get 3 stars. To finish off day 18, I also went to fight some Ruin Guards. I brought a Hyper Bloom team with me, and we were able to defeat all of the Ruin Guards at the beach. You can't really go wrong with Hyper Bloom, so we got a good amount of farming done for the day. On day 19, I returned to the Abyss for my final challenge on floor 12. I brought an international team comp, but since the first chamber had Hydro Eidolons that were pretty much immune to Hydro, I couldn't really use Childe in the beginning. Luckily, Kazuha could group them all together, and with Bennett keeping us alive, we defeated the first wave of enemies. The mega enemies were also pretty annoying as well, but Childe was able to quickly vaporize them and do good damage. Pyro was very good on his floor, and with everyone's help, we were able to get through the first chamber with maximum stars. In the second chamber, I quickly grouped up the enemies together, and just nuked them with Childe's burst. The purple balls were a bit tough and dealt a lot of damage, so it got a bit scary here. Fortunately for us, Bennett was able to keep everyone alive, and we completed the second chamber. The final chamber had the annoying ballerina bosses in Voltyea, and I had to swirl Pyro to break the shields. The international team actually worked out pretty nicely in this chamber since we could actually counter the boss with our elements. In this battle for survival, I was able to stay alive thanks to Bennett, and slowly got my bursts back, so we could strip the boss's HP down. In the end, we were also able to clear the abyss with all the stars. On the final day, it's finally time. Using everything I learned so far, I went to fight a Childe boss in a 1v1 without any other teammates. Before that, I actually warmed up against the Primordial Vision, and I used the team that I enjoyed playing the most out of the past 20 days. I might have messed up a little bit with my rotations, but I still found this team to be the most fun because I could utilize a lot of different reactions and burst with Childe to achieve big numbers. Alright, so I changed to a physical build for Childe again, and went to challenge myself alone. I used everything that I learned so far to defeat myself. The past 20 days of bringing my Childe from 0 to hero had definitely made me change my opinion of him. The reason why it took me that long to build him was because I didn't really like his playstyle. But for a version 1.1 character, his playstyle is definitely the most unique in Genshin. The ability to change to a melee stance and applying crazy amount of hydro to enemies is definitely very strong. And with the character roster in Genshin growing every patch, there's also a lot of potential for Childe. Now it's time to review our goals that we set upon ourselves to see if we successfully completed any of them. Our first goal was to level up to 90, which was the easiest one, so we could check that off already. We also completed the second goal without going out of a way to complete it, and we reached 100k damage with Childe's burst. The third goal was to complete the abyss with 36 stars. And with Childe, you could definitely say it was a Childe's play. The fourth goal was to defeat ourselves in a 1v1 battle. The fight itself was pretty easy since I fought myself countless times, and since we were able to stay a distance with a physical build, we didn't run into any troubles at all. I actually knew about Childe's kit already since he's been around forever, but after playing him for real, one thing I learned was to change back to his bow stance before switching him off because you'll get a longer cooldown if you swap to another character during the melee stance. I could definitely say that I've been sleeping on Childe for way too long, and leveling him up was definitely the best choice for me so far, and he's definitely earned that spot in my roster. With Childe's overall playstyle, strength, and enjoyment of his character, I'll rate him an A+. Since we're in the middle of the Fontaine patches, there are also going to be even more Hydro characters that are coming out. Maybe I'll do a New Versus 0 to hero next. My favorite team with Childe is definitely the Intergenerational team with Nahida, Kazuha, and Bennett as a team. But sure, those three characters can definitely make every other DPS characters OP. Kinda like how it made my Feminine OP as well in my other 0 to hero video. For those of you that main Childe, what are your other tips and teams that you like to use? If I missed anything, let me know in the comments below as well. As always, if you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel as well, and go check out my Feminine 0 to hero if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next one.